Disculpas, tuvimos un problema con el video. No sé si podemos arrancar y pasarlo después. Les pido disculpas.
Sorry, we had a problem with the video, and that's why we are in silence. It's okay, Fabiola. Good morning, everybody. For everybody. Name of CLADE. I give you the welcome. I welcome you with a lot of gratitude to be here with us, with everybody here in this opening from the campaign of the September dedicated to the thought and the practice and the proposal, pedagogical proposal of Paulo Freire, the great one, our Latin American teacher par excellence, and not only Latin American, but also from all the planet. The reach of Paulo Freire's thought and his proposal in all the continents has been enormous. Heritage is enormous and is expressed very especially in the great movement of popular education that exists in our region, in Africa, in Asia, and in many places where people have chosen these kind of teachings for their work. Obviously, CLADE has as an inspiration also all the proposal of Paulo Freire, because it is in the origin of our task and our basic. So we couldn't avoid to pass this month of his anniversary of 100 years since he was born, in order to bring him in the present and put again his thoughts and proposals over the table of our dialogue, and in the design of our proposals of transformation. So you're very much welcome. We have decided to frame this month in the link among the pedagogical proposal of Paulo Freire and our democracy. We are worried with our democracies, but we are also, we have the hope that the critical pedagogic and transforming thoughts, capacities of reading the context, and the certainty of our possibilities as human beings to transform reality are basic in order to fortify those democracies. And that's why we are starting this month with this interchange, with this dialogue, thinking on which are the contributions of Paulo Freire's proposal to our democracy, in which way we can contribute to this kind of education that liberates and transforms, another kind of education, fortify these democracies that have so many troubles in all the continents. And why we want to do it in all the continents? Because we are convinced that the transformation is needed to everyone, because our movement for the human right for education is a global movement. So that's why we have today here our colleagues from the Arab world, from Asia, from Europe, from Africa, and from the World Campaign for the Right for Education. We're very happy to have all of you here and to be able to approach in this way Paulo Freire from the different regions of the globe, and to give also a sign of the importance of this thought in all the world. So thank you so much to each one of you that you are here, all the ones that are following us from the social nets, in YouTube, in Instagram, and Facebook, everything, everywhere. Thank you so much to be with us, and thank you especially to our so loved colleagues from the campaigns, the sister campaigns from Africa, Asia, and the Arab world, from ICAE, and from the World Campaign for Education, for gathering in this homage, in this moment, as Mercedes has mentioned in this chat, that is not a homage to a thought that already passed, but an alive thought that has a lot to contribute to our way of doing and our fights for the human rights for education. Good morning, very much welcome everybody. Giovanna. Thank you, Nancy. Good morning. My name is Giovanna Mode. I'm the coordinator of politics in the CLADE, and I'm very happy to moderate here together with other moderators. I will be here facilitating the first part of this wonderful panel. I am happy to see so many people that are committed with this virtual encounter, and we have 6 participation from different regions, all of them from 10 minutes maximum. So I'm explaining our dynamics, and at the end, we will have a time for interchange, questions, answers, and the ones that want can place in the chat their reflections. Will be very attentive and see how the people is following through the social net and placing their comments and questions. The translations here in Zoom are available through the different channels, as you already know. And without taking more time, I invite our first panelist from our region, from Latin America and the Caribbean. We have the honor to have Pedro Pontual. Pedro is a reference of our region, of this team. He's a member of the director of CLADE Brazil, is a teacher of Filipino, and member of the group of popular education from Claxo, among so many other things. So, dear Pedro, you are very much welcome, and for you is the floor. Thank you. Thank you, Giovanna. Good morning, everybody. Dear friends and dear companions. In Latin America, today, Paulo Freire has become an icon of the commitment with the oppressed, the defense of democracy, and of all the rights of people throughout all life. So also of a popular education that will be transforming. In that context, that we are living all around the world, but especially Latin America, of a conservative, offensive, authoritarian practices, and the expression of the freedom of teaching is represented by Paulo Freire, that fights this conservative wave present in all the continents. So we need to participate in this cultural war among different paradigms, the paradigm of the market, of earnings and selfish, and on the other hand, solidarity and to take care of life. In such fight, the profound humanist and critic thought of Paulo Freire and the radically democracy is the most important thing in Paulo Freire, to the critical thought and the solidarian actions that the life and the practice of Paulo Freire represents is a basic message regarding this health crisis and the threats to democracy. In this context, the net to which I am very much linked, the CEAO, the popular education in Latin America and the Caribbean, to which CLADE is a partner, as many other social movements. We have organized a big campaign in defense of the heritage of Paulo Freire, a campaign that is the memory that tries to recover his thoughts, but also of social mobilization of the society in order to comprehend the relevance of the contributions of Paulo Freire in this moment of the crisis of democracy. And also is the reinvention of his thought, how to reinvent his thought according to the new challenges that we have. Without considering many practices regarding childhood and youth and adults that are mobilized in this moment in order to reflect regarding Paulo Freire's practices, using many different forms of expression of human being, as for instance the letters from Paulo Freire, which were a way very strong to express many opinions regarding the oppression that we lived in our continent and the need of freedom regarding those oppressions. In that process, we have been an intergenerational movement with people of all ages. And the discussion and reflection on his practical thought is present not only in the social movements, for instance, movement of Centerra and all kind of movements of reflection about the question of education of Paulo Freire in this process, but is also present in the schools and where the educators have a commitment with a critical thought. Paulo Freire is different in many different areas of knowledge, not only in education, but also in social sciences, in biological sciences, in medical sciences, in many areas of thought. Paulo Freire is, nevertheless, then much more than some documents that can be deepened. It's a proposal from many points of view, ethical, aesthetical, educational, that can free us, that can lead us to a freedom. And that's why it represents a philosophy of education that has an etymological base. Is an etymological that is not only to comprehend the world, but also is a way of being in the world. Paulo Freire means a commitment and a proposal of change that has been upgraded, and this idea of education that is committed with the change can be applied to different historical moments, and people say that he has a profound passion for freedom, and his main work, he develops this characteristic, the paradigm of this education for the change, starting from a practical education and passing for the pedagogical ways, solidarian, and the building of hope and tolerance and commitment. He invites us then in this critical moment of democracies to resist as a way of practice and raise of hope, the practice of building what he called the possible hopes. This is educational practices and social practices that end today with the possibility of building another possible world, another way of living democracy, another paradigm for the civilization. So in many fields of practices, the popular education, we are building these incredible paradigms that Paulo Freire proposal, and he invites us also to review history as a time of possibilities and crossing them from any fatalist dimension, to review history as a predestination, and in that moment of crisis in which we are living with multiple crises, social, cultural, political, environmental, Paulo Freire's invitation is for this moment a great possibility to build other practices possibles. Other possible practices. Paulo Freire also invites us to comprehend ourselves as selves that are not completed, so we have to complete ourselves and finish ourselves. He invites us to an exercise, a permanent exercise of looking for the surpassing our naive curiosity towards an epidemiological curiosity. So he invites us as educators for a clear comprehension that any practice is a political practice, a practice that reveals the political motivation. So it is against any idea of neutrality of the practice. So I will finish with these interventions, remembering that that from this moment of crisis of democracy could recover these dialectic ideas for the comprehension of Freire, that education alone does not transform democracy, but without education, democracy is not transformed. Education by itself does not transform the world. The people transform the world, and the people are the ones that transform the world. So I think the practical things, educational things, inspired in Paulo Freire, can contribute in a very strong way for rethinking democracy and rethinking the paradigms of civilization that must orient us. Thank you very much. Thank you, Pedro. Thank you so much for this great contribution to put in evidence this radically democratic thought with this passion for the human freedom and the significance of resistance and that Paulo Freire showed us. Thank you so much. And now I think from São Paulo we go to Senegal Maybe we go to Africa, where we know that also this thought had a big influence. We invited to Sidibe Gama. I don't know if I see her here.
Ella tiene amplia experiencia en educación.
Has a great experience in education and is member of the directive committee of the CLADE in Africa from CLADE. She's here.
Si puedes abrir su micrófono. Ah, sí, ahora sí, la veo. Muy bienvenida. Tienes la palabra. Tus 10 minutos. Le aviso cuando falte un minuto. Muchas gracias.
Je vous remercie. Et tout le monde m'entend bien?
Yes. Do you hear me well?
Sí.
Bonjour tout le monde m'entend bien?
Good morning, everybody. Everybody hears me well.
Yes, Adama.
Donc,
It's okay.
d'accord, j'y vais. Je voudrais d'abord remercier tout le monde.
I would like to thank everybody. I am honored of being able to speak here, but I am honored. I have discovered very late, maybe quite late, a great thought and a great thinker. So I thank you so much. Without more delay, I will start my presentation and I will propose you, because the horizon of my intervention is a challenge. I will be very limited, speaking clearly. I will try to give context to this innovation and pedagogical thought. I will try to get out some lessons from his thought. The good philosophers, we have the impression that this thought really is something very important even now. After the lesson, I will try to see and share with you what I think on him, and I will get into the conclusion. So, as I said, as my horizon is limited because of this question, of whom I am speaking from my experience, in a quite long experience as a fighter and education and teacher. No, I cannot speak in the name of my country, but I will try to speak from my experience, not from my continental, but education in Africa is very wise and diverse. So I will recontextualize the critical pedagogical way of doing. This is a Brazilian story in time and space, but this Brazilian story, the Brazil is not an island, so at a world level, this story can be a crossroad. And this is a good thing. And this story of this pedagogical example had a name of military dictatorship, and at the end, an amnesty law. So this pedagogical was very important, and it has been affected by the economical crisis, financial, social, political, and that has destabilized the country. The right for education for everybody has been something quite late that came, but interesting and important And in my research, I propose, according to my experience in Senegal, to have the politicization in the university space and the school space, and this pedagogical way of doing would be very diverse with a big heterogeneity. This philosophy for education is found over certainty, as there is a passion and there is humanism, which is central in this vision, in this pedagogical thought, rejection of the formal education as we know it. It is much more than that. An education without a cultural environment is not possible. Another thing is regarding the contents. The contents are extremely important because they are politics and cultural, and they reinforce the critical spirit. Education is not the source of knowledge. There is not neutrality. Education is a political commitment, and we need the courage to say it, to be able to say it. I think that education is basically political, and it's a commitment because it must give continuity to democracy, especially in our African countries where we don't know well what is democracy, or we have very little democracy. We need to increase democracy in Africa. And another thing is a continuous battle. Okay, these are some solutions for me. We don't have to limit education inside the school, not only according to receiving education from teachers, but we have to include in the programs many contents that need to be reviewed, and that is important. It's very important. Today, education means to educate citizens in the citizenship, to educate for peace, to educate for the global and local context, education for the resolution of conflicts out of the school context and inside also, an education for environment. This is very important, and this is not only regarding climate change, but environment in general. For the solution for a new present education, we need the comfort of political education, and education is that. Education is not a circle. Education is a triangle with formator for students and parents, but we have to open up this triangle to go to the community, to the society, and to do from the quality of education, quality with big letters, a quality that will give us the better sense of education and consider the students and also the teachers, because they have droit, and there is not just one model, there are several models in education. So there is a religious education from the family, from the society, from everywhere. Now I go to my conclusions. I am looking for my minutes. I think we have reproposed and see the existence of questions of policy and education. These are very important factors. In the first question, who are we? Who are we? What have we become? Which is the way we are teaching? If we consider the chain of education or the chain of evolution, in which part of the chain are we? In which generation and epoch are we?
Sans humanité.
I think we are without humanity in a dehumanized world. We need that the school today can share many knowledge, but also many behaviors, but also the relation, intergenerational relationships. There is domination today, and always in my conclusions, and this will be my last part, if we look at the world today, we need to stay optimistic, and seeing that a virus, a virus has changed the world. We have the resilience in front of this world that is changing so fast, and we need to speak of not of resilience but of resistance in order to light a time where we will be global and the environment will be recovered. And my last point of my conclusions is that I don't want to be a bird that says wrong things, but I think we need to survey education and democracy and be very attentive to keep that. Thank you so much.
Muchísimas gracias. Muchísimas gracias de verdad por Adama por ese bellísimo aporte.
Thank you, Adama, for this wonderful contribution and these questions on the context of Africa and the critical thought. Contributions that from the region are given, and to find our challenges and common contributions for democracy. This is a world challenge. Thank you so much. And now we'll give the floor to the Dr. Zahi Azar, that is coming from the countries of the Arab countries. Dr. Zahi has a big experience in developing methodologies of Paulo Freire in countries as Lebanon, Sudan, Egypt, Morocco, Palestine, Iraq, and many other countries. So it's a joy to hear you.
Merci, la joie est partagée.
Thank you, the joy is shared, and this is an occasion for me to relaunch our international discussion, deep discussion regarding Paulo Freire, that since so many years up to today, he dominates all the popular efforts in education. Regarding the Arab world, we have tried since about 30 years to adopt the thought and the experience in our region. And as you know, life not only in the Arab world, but everywhere is changing in a permanent way. And the workers in education must really adapt themselves, adopting in a permanent way. And we assist today to a phenomenon that is very much challenging for our thought. And everywhere, I think, because education in a formal way and education in general is in crisis. It's a big crisis because it is so much linked for to the needs of the market that today education is not longer education, but it's to teach things useful for the market. And this is is terrible because the concept of education, direct or indirect, is overpassing. And the world, the values of education in this world that could help for a change today are not longer on education. And education, the public education is finishing because the private education is taking place everywhere. So a lot of changes are occurring. Briefly, for the popular education, there is much more adults, a lot of adults that like to form part of this kind of popular education that is much bigger and larger because these societies are needing it each time more. And let's not speak about violence because everywhere we are having violence and it has its wars and violence and all these changes in education. The Freire thought remained as something very essential, as a thought that can liberate us, but can challenge all the time the pedagogical, the dominant pedagogics, but also we have discovered that has many problems, and we have to do some critique regarding how do we approach the Freire's thought. So one asks oneself if really there is this Freire's thought, because the concept of the Freire's thought is not so evident today. Unfortunately, everything is simplified today, and as you know, the popular education and the Freire's thought is threatened by cliches, by way of thinking very simplistic, and they are very much known, but they are not well lived because they are not lived within the experimental dialectics of Freire, but they are lived as cliché of this thought. And here I have to stop because in front of all this, put yourself in front of the societies that are not from Latin America and where the translation of the text of Freire without the Portuguese or the Spanish that are usually in a bad translation and a selection very limited that amplifies the thought of the Freire, and we try with the Freire thought in general, we try to thought that one must know, and the translation does not facilitate things. Translation is very little done of Freire. We translate him very little, and Freire's thought needs to support itself at the end with his last writings, which are very important but are not well known, and the essential. It was written and experienced through these dialectics that is proposed, and we need to support in a sense or another. Unfortunately, I say, and even in formal education, there is a recuperation, a growing recuperation of Freire's thought. I don't want to use very hard words, but I would say that the traditional capital, putting aside this thought, but we need to recuperate it and put it in the formal pedagogical world, if we can say something like that, and also use it for keeping this thought for new priorities that are important in face of this growing capital imposing itself today in the world. At the end, I want to say that Freire's thought means that we need to go back to Paulo Freire, consider him completely, and read him, and try to practice this thought, and to make new discoveries of this Freire's thought, because it pushes us to rediscover a big world in this thought, and discover, starting from this experience, that adjusting and adding more thoughts in a permanent way, so that the popular education, in a certain sense, could help to all the ones that have had this experience, and could have the elements, creatives, of innovation that adds to this thought, and that pushes us to comprehend well the experience of Freire and his written expression, and to make it progress. In all these fields, today, there is a big deformation of this thought and of this experience. And we are really, after all, learning all these elements, in order to liberate again the Freire's thought, and know it well, the whole of this thought, from the beginning to the end, all this experience, and to try to give it diffusion in the popular educational environments in general, in the third world and over it, in all the ambits, because this process, if I can call it liberation, is framed in our fights, permanent fights today, that challenge the new dominations of the capital, and this thought must stay as the main support in education, in popular education, but also from the popular education as a liberation action towards the formal education, because this thought of Freire could have its own energy, the pedagogical energy that can transform in a permanent way and with creation. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for this beautiful contribution. Thank you for seeing the Freire paradigm seen and live from there, and this need, this real need of a connection, of this purpose of the Freire thought. We thank so much your contribution. I want to remember everybody that here you can leave your questions in the chat. We will pass a very fast video called Letter of the Teachers to Paulo Freire. It's a contribution of Latin America and the Caribbean, and then we continue with the second block of presentations. Thank you.
Creo que el video viene desde Fabi. ¿Es así, querida? Estaríamos con el video ahí disponible. No se escucha el sonido. Si podemos comenzar otra vez con el sonido. Todavía no, querida, está como mudo el video. Creo que ya lo ponemos otra vez. Ok. Ahora sí.
Aqui ninguém vai esquecer Paulo Freire e sua força pra gente viver. Aqui ninguém vai se calar Paulo Freire e sua força pra gente lutar. Aqui ninguém vai esquecer Paulo Freire e sua força pra gente viver. Aqui ninguém vai se calar Paulo Freire e sua força pra gente lutar. Amor em comunidade, no campo e na cidade, esperança e curiosidade de ver o mundo se refazer novo, palavra e coragem do povo. Aqui ninguém vai esquecer Paulo Freire e sua força pra gente viver. Aqui ninguém vai se calar Paulo Freire e sua força ensinante ao ensinar. Repensa o pensado, repassa o passado, rebate a mentira e coloca a vida em primeiro lugar. E coloca a vida em primeiro lugar. O aprendizado do ensinante ao ensinar retoma.
Se cortó, ¿será que retomamos el panel?
Retomamos, Lau. Sí, retomamos.
Ok, bueno, entonces soy Laura Gianecchini del equipo de CLADE. Y voy
I am Laura Gianecchini from CLADE team. And I will facilitate this panel from European Asian regards and from a global perspective. I remember you that we will have a debate at the end of the session. But you, if you want, you can write down your questions in the chat. Now we will hear Katarina Popović from Europe. She's from the ICAE and teacher of the university in Serbia from adults. She's the chief editor of a magazine and author of many articles and books for the field of education for adults. We are very happy to have you here. And I will tell you when you are missing 1 minute. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. And I'm really glad that I could share with you today some thoughts on Paulo Freire. And I would like to join the congratulations. Our president, ICAE president, Roberto Guevara, said congratulations for this lovely and important event. We have several members of ICAE here among the audience, and I'm really glad to transfer the best greetings from the ICAE members and colleagues and partners to you. So it's really lovely to be today here, and my task is to shed some light on the role Paulo Freire and his ideas have in a modern Europe. So if you allow me, I will first share my presentation. Just give me a second. So, okay, here it is. So just tell me if it's visible, if you can see it nicely. Is it okay?
No, todavía no.
No, not yet. Okay.
No.
So let me
Katarina,
try again.
I think that you have to open your PowerPoint in your computer and then
Yeah, I
okay,
just did.
That's it.
And it's a small delay. Now you can see it and you can hear me.
Yes, perfectly.
Very well, thank you. So my question today is that I've asked myself, and I will try to give you some answers. What is the role of Paulo Freire today in Europe? Is it a living legacy, what we had, or more a kind of academic decoration? It might sound a little bit exaggerated, but I will give you a few thoughts and few arguments on that. So talking about Paulo Freire today and asking ourselves, is he still present in Europe? Well, check our libraries and check the conferences, the meetings, and so on. And you will see that Paulo Freire is very well alive. His thoughts, much of the books translated in almost all European languages, a lot of publications, a lot of discussions. You can find thousands of articles, books, research, studies, comparisons. And not only that, even in the field of institutions and organizations, he is still very much alive. So I have listed a few of the centers research centers, academic centers, but also Center for Education providers, education provision in several of the European countries. So based on that, you can really see that it's very live, and there is a lively discussion on many of the topics related to the legacy of Paulo Freire. I have listed here a few of them. There is always a discussion of, oh, is it more a theoretical approach, what we have from Paulo Freire, or is it more a method? Was he more talking about education generally or adult education? Is his focus on literacy or on adult education in general? Was Paulo Freire educationalist or philosopher or sociologist or activist? What about Marxistic influence on his ideas, strong or not? How far are his ideas religious or not? Then there are comparisons of early Freire from his early books and later Freire after he changed and developed some of his thoughts. So very lively discussions and a lot of academic articles, studies, and publications on that. But my thesis is that it's not very much present in the educational reality. That's why I used a strong term, it's more an academic decoration. So in the academic sphere, ideas of Paulo Freire are very well alive. What about the practice of adult education? Well, we could find Freirean approach and methods in some spaces, in some circles. Of course, most of all in the civil society, or to be more precise, in some sectors of civil society, some subsectors, and of course, mostly in a non-formal educational spaces, but also in a limited circles. So you can find some spaces where reflect approach is implemented, or theater of the oppressed and so on. So it is applied, but it's quite limited in the practice of adult education. Mostly in the countries that have some kind of development cooperation and colleagues who work abroad in Africa, Latin America, Asia, Arab region, when they come back to the European countries where they then continue to work, they bring some of those ideas and practices. And the other field where we can find it is in organizations and people who work with the migrants, refugees, or simply people with a different cultural background. So, but I would dare to say it's more an exception than a rule. So in a reality of adult education practice and literacy practice in Europe, Paulo Freire is not very well alive. And I will give you a few reasons for that. Of course, it's complex, so it will not be exhausting list, but still a few observations that might help us to understand why it is like this. So first one is the dominance of neoliberal discourse. It was already mentioned by Zahi, so I don't need to go to the details, but I just want to say that the neoliberal discourse and the kind of, I would dare to say, vulgar pragmatism is very much alive in Europe. So in the past few decades, European policy on education was trying to balance between pragmatism, between utilitarian goals, and the social inclusion and social justice on the other side. I would say that now the first one prevails, and the neoliberal discourse whipped out the other discourses and the other approaches to education. So this is the first reason, and as I said, we heard already from Zahi and from other speakers, previous speakers, more about that. Next reason is the prevalence and dominance of vocational education and training in Europe. Although the document on adult education policy in Europe do talk about other roles and other types of adult education, like active citizenship and so on, in the reality, we see that vocational education and training have really the dominance, and adult education that was a part of Directorate General for Education and Culture. This is the structure in European Commission. Now it's moved to the Directorate for Employment. So employment and adult education. So we see clearly that the focus is pragmatic on vocational education and training. One of the Paulo Freire centers, the one in Ireland, is called even Center for Continuing Education, so professional education. Well, that's not really, of course, in the spirit of Paulo Freire, but it tells us something about the reality of the European policy and practice of adult education. Next reason, and I believe this is a very important one, is a very strong influence on OECD, on European policy on adult education and literacy. I'm sure you know a lot about PISA and PIAC studies, and they played an important role, those studies, because they showed to the European policymakers and audience that illiteracy, adult illiteracy is an important problem in Europe as well, not only in so-called developing countries. So it was a kind of a wake-up call, really, like having millions of people who are illiterate, adult people. So it was a wake-up call, and that was thanks to the PIAC study of OECD. But there was a lot of harm also. And the harm is mostly done by the concept of OECD literacy. That's the way how OECD is defining and studying literacy. It's reading, writing, and technological literacy, technological skills. So that's really a reductive approach, looking at education through the lenses of skills. Nothing could be further from Paulo Freire's ideas, because skills are reductive, limited, utilitarian, and pragmatic. And reducing literacy to the list of skills, that's really taking us far away from how Paulo Freire saw literacy. And of course, a dominant discourse run by OECD and followed by European Commission, European countries, is also digital literacy. So it's not about reading the complexity of the world, as Paulo Freire wanted that, but it's about reading the complexity of the digital world. And I'm afraid it's increasing now even more. So seeing literacy through these reductive lenses is really harming the emancipatory understanding of literacy that was promoted by Paulo Freire, and that was accepted and is accepted, as I said, by some circles in Europe, but not so much in the reality. And following that, there is also an understanding of the role of adult education. So more and more adult education is seen as a tool for adaptation. So adult education is supposed to help people to cope with the changes, to cope with the technological changes, to follow the changes in the industry and technology, and so on. There is no so much reflection, there is no transformation. So truly transformative learning is present, well, in the books, studies, and so on, but not in the reality. Adult education provision is based more on a discourse of adaptation and not change, reflection, transformation. So what is the current situation? Well, there is a new wind, but I wouldn't be too optimistic about this one. I'm sure you know about the recent, well, not so recent, 1-year-old initiative of UNESCO. That's about the futures of education. So the group of experts from around the globe and with a broad participation is developing a new vision or visions of education. And there are discussions to introduce a new pillar. You know already about 4 existing pillars of Jacques Delors: learning to be, learning to know, learning to do, and learning to live together, to add a new pillar, learning to change. Well, we still don't know if it will be accepted, and if it's formally accepted, if it will be implemented. But I would say that there is a new wind, a new feeling that a true change is really needed, and that adult education should really go for change and not only for adaptation. So current situation in Europe, yeah?
Katarina, 1 minute, please.
Yes, so I'm finishing with the current situation. So there is an increased interest from Freire, for new Freirean approach. We have several waves and several types of crises. So there was financial crisis, health crisis, crisis of values, and so on. So need for change is obviously there. Need to rethink the role of education and adult education. We know that neocolonialism is still very much alive, and European countries are taking part in that. So they need to rethink what they are doing, and adult education should help them. The global power architecture, where European countries play an important role, requires also rethinking this power structure, and Paulo Freire ideas will be very helpful for that. There are plenty of civic movements, plenty of civic protests. There is an increased power of local community and local organization and around adult education. So adapted to the context, but run by the global solidarity and global ideas. And I see some hope in that. And of course, COVID-19 is a new challenge. And I think we can find some of the answers to the new questions posed by COVID-19 pandemic situation. We can find some answers in Paulo Freire ideas on citizenship, democracy, participation, and so on. So we do have activism on one side, but there is danger of populism on the other side, and threats of democracy, even in highly developed European countries. So this new danger is there, and I see that there is a tendency to look again to the Paulo Freire ideas and to try to find some answers on that. And finally, just to conclude, in Europe, we say that it's the time for Grundtvig, the famous Danish educator who helped to establish adult education system in Europe today. It's time for Grundtvig and Paulo Freire to meet. And I would say it's time for them to cooperate. Paulo Freire, in his last interview to Rosa Maria Torres, left the message, "I would like to die leaving a message of struggle." Are we doing it in Europe, or are we only adapting? That's the question that we really have to ask ourselves. Thank you very much. I will be glad to answer any questions later.
Muchas gracias, Katarina, por esa mirada, ¿no? de la distancia que hay.
Thank you, Katarina, for this thought of the distance between the thought of Freire and the implementation of what is not Freire, but we have this hope of a permanent thought that can bring us to change and to fight. And I hope that in Europe you are trying to recovering and these ideas formulated by Paulo Freire. Now we will go to Asia with Sunil. She's the coordinator of the Young ASPBAE people. He's giving the impulse with youth of ASPBAE in his region, and he will share how this experience is inspired on the principles and concepts of Paulo Freire. I will tell you when you have 1 minute. Yours the floor, Sunil.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Sunil Gangavane, and I'm youth coordinator at ASPBAE. I'm based in India, and I'll be sharing a case study of youth-led action research, which is a youth engagement program of ASPBAE, and we are working with our members in the Asia Pacific region. So when we are saying we are working with our members, we are working with our regional networks and the young people. And all of you know that the more than 750 million youth are living in this region. And the challenges and concerns of young people are dynamic as the social realities are changing. We are building their capacities in the youth engagement program to understand these complex realities and also bring innovative solutions to engage with the current realities. And in this presentation today, I will be reflecting on how we can build on principles, lessons of Freire's, and how we can integrate into our program, and especially develop new initiatives, integrate those ideas and principles working with young people. And I definitely believe that intergenerative programs are the best programs where we can meaningfully engage young people into action programs. Before I move into presentations, I briefly want to introduce ASPBAE's work. ASPBAE is a regional network of more than 200 CSOs and individuals around 30 countries of the Asia Pacific. We work towards promoting the right to quality education and transformative and liberative lifelong adult education and learning. ASPBAE lobbies with governments to uphold education as an empowering tool. And we understand education as a human right, and we work with our members. And I will be giving you examples of youth-led action research in this presentation. I'm very happy to be part of these presentations and the celebration of Freire's work and legacy. It's very important for us to continue discussing, building on his legacy and the work and his contribution to the transformative education. In my understanding, Freire has not only given us a philosophy education, a pedagogy of education and development, but he has also given us a very practical method of getting groups actively involved. If we see his literature, his work, he has given us so many methods and ways to how we can mobilize people meaningfully, build on the collaboration and community participations, different ways of bringing change in the community. He has also given us ways and methods how we can break through apathy of the community. And that's very important. Engaging through the feeling emotions of community, motivating them and building their confidence and their agency that they can bring change. They can work for their own liberation, and not only for only individual liberation, but doing that praxis, doing reflection and action, they can collectively work for a community liberation. So that those methods are very important. Of course, he has also given us how to develop critical awareness of the causes of problem, which we call critical conscientizations. And these principles are very important, and his methodologies are very important, which we in our program also have integrated working with the youth. I will also share some of the lessons which we find are very, very critical, important, working with the young people. Of course, working with any community members, but while I'm sharing the youth-led initiatives, these are some of the principles on which the program is built on. Freire has a strong belief in transformation of people, and he has already mentioned that, he's always mentioned that transformation can only be carried with the people, and that is where the people transformation, the people's ability to work for their own liberation is very important. And that also reminds us to be vigilant, be careful about what kind of methods we are using to work with people, what kind of approaches we are using to work with people. Of course, his strong belief in the people's ability to work for their liberation, people's ability to build on their own wisdom from their lived reality, their experience is amazing. And that's where he has taught us to listen to them and building on their strengths. And these are very important principles which we keep in mind when we work with people, when we design our training, when we design our interventions. Again, when we say knowledge building processes, and we believe that it is very important to work with community people to bring their wisdom, bring their ideas and realities into writing a new story. people have ability to read their reality and write a new story. And when I'm going to share a research initiative, and this is very important principle there. Of course, another principle is about development is awakening process. With praxis, people will start seeing their right to live as a human beings. This is very important. As a facilitator, as animators, as a development worker, what we have to learn and remember that the awakening process needs to start. Our role is to facilitate that process, and they themselves will start their role to see their right to live. And this will only come when they engage into reflective learning process. People can build the future for themselves. And when they start making those independent choices for oneself, and those choices comes after the cause-effect relationships. When they investigate into the root causes, they start making choices. And it is very interesting, the movement from apathy to making the independent choices. They themselves starts making choices, and that brings self-respect and dignity. And that is an amazing liberating process to witness. And very important is building the people's solidarity, a movement of people's movement, as an outcome, which can sustain this process of reflection and learning and action. These are very important. Why I referred these important principles from Freire's work, because this lays the foundations for the program which we have initiated for our members in the Asia South Pacific. Okay, I'll be briefly mentioning about the program now, because in my presentations, I do want to highlight the application of Freire's work in current reality and how it is so important for the young people in my region. And there are so many stories for all of us to learn and take back to our work in the respective communities. In the youth engagement program of ASPBAE, we want to build a youth constituency of the young people. And when I say young people, we work with young people coming from marginalized backgrounds. So these are the diverse young people coming from indigenous background, Adivasis, tribal, Dalit, many young girls, and many more. These young people are trained into using participatory action research for understanding the gaps in the education, for understanding the gaps in their services, and for also collectively coming towards for sharing the recommendations and ideas on what kind of education they would want, what kind of services they would want, what are the issues in their community, not the issues only with them, but with their peers, with their community. So these young people come together to investigate into their reality using participatory action research as a tool, and they also bring the recommendation solutions, and with their members, with their mentors, with community stakeholders, they launch an evidence-based advocacy programs which connects their knowledge, which connects their research data to action. And that's how the research action cycles continues. So this is what I've been sharing. And if we notice participatory CLADE action research, this has been practiced in Asian context from many time, but applying participatory youth-led action research with the youth's reality and enabling young people to understand the tools, perspectives of youth-led action research, and then using this lens to build their critical thinking, to build their critical analysis, and then demanding good quality education, demanding their rights which are related to SDGs, but also equally participating in planning and decision making. That is very important. And that's where, as Katarina before was mentioning, how we can see the emancipatory approach of knowledge, education is very important. And this is where we see the education then not only remains the literacy exercise, but education becomes part and parcel of daily living. Education becomes the tool to ask questions, but also to bring solutions. These are the young people who are demanding for quality education, specifically into SDG 4 and other SDGs. These are the young people taking active role into advocacy, seminars, conferences. These are the young people into training activities using, of course, participatory methodologies, which comes from Freire's pedagogy. I'll briefly sharing you case study of. Okay, I see. Thanks. Thanks for that reminder. I'll be just briefly mentioning the case study of Shodhinis. Shodhini is a Marathi word which literally means seeker. These are the young girls from rural Maharashtra of India. Most of these girls come from tribal background. They were trained to use research to understand why the education services are not accessible for young girls in their communities, why they are forced into early marriages, and so on and so forth. In their research, if you see, most of them have dropped out of their schools, but while working with the other girls, they have learned to do analysis of data, they have learned to gather data, and then when they compiled their research, they took that research to different stakeholders in the community, including parents, village councillor members, leaders, and government representative. So this was one initiative in India. A similar initiative in Philippines, where the young girls and young students are coming together to asking questions about their education, and then taking initiative where they demand that education should be free, accessible, and available to everyone. They have been using their research for working with other youth leaders in their communities and linking their research to advocacy actions. Similar experiences, similar initiatives in Nepal. These are the young girls coming together to asking, to discussing on what are the challenges of COVID pandemic in their community. Recently, we also had similar youth-led action research done in 9 countries to understand the impact of COVID pandemic on the marginalized youth. The research is available on our ASPBAE website. This is a picture from Timor-Leste. Timor-Leste, after the research, they were able to form a forum for marginalized youth. And through this forum, they have been continuously engaging with government representatives in 12 different municipalities, asking government to become accountable for the rights of young people to the services. These are the examples of COVID pandemic. Young people were involved in the research, but also in the actions. Katarina also mentioned about UNESCO's initiative about futures of education. We are very happy to inform that our members in the Asia Pacific region also contributed what is the marginalized young people's perspective and futures recommendation for futures education. That report is also contributed to UNESCO. And this is what we want to continue. We want to mobilize young people, their voices, and represent, amplify at different local, national, and global spaces. There are some, these are some pictures of events like APFSD, GCE, and other events where our youth representatives shared their youth voices. These are the voices coming from evidence-based researchers and advocacy. And this is the last line. Thank you from all the young people in our Asia Pacific region. We are very happy to contribute these ideas and share the youth-led action research initiative. And we do want to see many organizations continue working and engaging with young people to inform them the legacy of Freire and continue using these methodologies for liberation of all the people in that region. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias, Sunil, por compartir.
Thank you for these interesting experiences that inspired us and promote discussions in the chat. I see that there are some questions, and I tell you to continue writing them, and we will pass to a debate very soon. And very interesting seeing how the young people is reading, promoting the transformation of the people. Thank you so much. Now we pass to Vernor Muñoz, that coordinates the World Campaign for Education and works in Costa Rica from 2004 to 2010. He was the special relator from education and the author of many articles on human rights. We are very happy to have you here, Vernor. You have 10 minutes, and I will tell you when you are lacking 1 minute. Thank you, Laura. Thank you so much. And I thank CLADE for organizing this wonderful encounter, remembering Paulo Freire, and I say hello to all the organizations that are here in the World Campaign at the regional as well as the local level. I will try to be short in these reflections, in these thoughts that probably will repeat some of the ideas that were already said by my colleagues. And talking about dimensions, I think that Paulo Freire's thought can show us many conclusions for education and for the world, general world. But there are two dimensions that I think are very useful for our movements, which are the dimensions, the pedagogical dimension and the political dimension of the Freire's thought. In the pedagogical as well as in the political dimension, there are, of course, some implications of an epistemological dimension from this Freire idea that nobody teaches anyone, that we learn all together. So there is an epistemological dimension evident, but also an ontological one, because we know, thanks to Freire and to other authors, that the being and the consciousness always is built in diversity. So in order to be, we need the others. In order to be conscious, we need others. But there is also an implication deontological. There is an ethical content that is implied in a need to be, in a political mandate that is found on an authority concept that, according to Freire, always has to come from freedom. There is a concept that is legitimate and valid always, that is built in the process of democratization, and that rescues the source that generates freedom. These dimensions, of course, were expressed by the initial Freire's thought in the pedagogical of the oppressed one, and from these dimensions, two characteristics came out. From the Freire's thought that are proposed as objectives or proposals or bases, as you want to call them, that education must be liberate the people and transform people. These concepts are basic, but they have guided us, this concept, in all the political struggles that we have given all these years. Emancipation and transformation are also processes that we need to comprehend, and to the ones that we need to aspire. And this sense of aspiration, of liberation and emancipation and transformation is very clear in the hope pedagogical idea that is in one of the last latest books that supposes also to invent a new citizenship. And Freire puts the emphasis on inventing a new creative idea that comes from the reality of the ones without any power. And this is very important to put an emphasis on the rights of women. And Freire, in this book of hope, in pedagogical hope, shares a gender vision that he builds with the years, because at the beginning he didn't have, but he built it with the years, and this is very important. We need to rescue, because this transformation is not possible but with the liberation of the woman. So the fight that is proposed in these days in Afghanistan, for instance, is very paradigmatic, if you want. With the emancipation and transformation, thanks to education, as Katarina very well explained, we have focused it in very different ways in the pedagogical ambit and in the educational policies in the international context, where have bring us to a lot of rhetoric, but a little practice, little action. You mentioned it before, but I want to remember that these ideas of Freire that were taken by the international ambit in many cases have been compared and bring, as you said now, with this famous work of Jacques Delors in the education as a treasure. This document, final document, is based in Freire's ideas, basically. So it has been very appropriate, and it has gone to the rhetorics, but hasn't bring to practical changes. So there is an empty rhetoric that launches Freire ideas without any context, as it is with the transformative education without any content. So we don't know what to transform or for what or with which resources. So many of the ideas of Freire are bringing to colonial context and are not recognized the colonial past, as the Belgium context, for instance, the genocide is not recognized. And like that, we can put many examples, not where there are no translation of concrete objectives. We continue trying to reach the development in terms of economical goals, but not in education. And we are not talking only of the European countries. I want to remain this very clear in our own continent. The rights of the indigenous people, of the Afro-descendant peoples, of the minorities are still there, being just a rhetorical. That we don't have public policies that really attend to those contexts. So the manipulation of ideas of Freire are not dissimulated in the prevalence of political reductions, ideas, or reflected in the ends and objectives of the education as the human rights laws are proposed. And these visions are replaced by a need of going back to educational systems that have efficiency and according to the market, basically. So these visions that are useful for those objectives are growing, and we have seen how these growing are displacing in the international ambit the way of taking decisions, starting by United Nations, and converting these spaces in territories that are gained by the big corporations and the big banks. So never before was so clear the banking education. The banking are stating the big educational policies to the corporations and not the community, the organized communities. So there is a coalition for business in education that has many corporations which are there, integrate this coalition. They have been involved in big taxes scandal, and they continue being as the big definers of the educational policies, and these big corporations have their obligations to pay their taxes, and they should put more resources for education, but they avoid paying these taxes. So this double discourse is infecting the educational policies at an international level, which is far away from Freire thought, and puts all these thoughts of Freire as a souvenir, as something to take back home, but is not bring into action. Thank you very much. Thank you, Pedro. Thank you for putting this dimension in the Freire's thought, emancipation and transformation, and for the need of having a new citizenship from the oppressed ones with a perspective without paternalism and colonialism in order to surpass these visions in education. And in these corporations, I will add the communications and technology corporations as well as the other ones. After this fantastic panel, we will hear also a homage of Chico César to Paulo Freire, and then we continue with Jesus Suarez, that is a member of the directive CLADE collective. So if you want to continue to put your questions in the chat, will be great.
Os olhos tristes da fita rodando no gravador, uma moça cozendo roupa com a linha do Equador, e a voz da santa dizendo: o que é que eu tô fazendo? Cai em cima desse andor. A tinta pinta o asfalto, enfeita a alma motorista, é cor na cor da cidade, batom no lábio nortista, o olhar vê tons tão sudestes, e o beijo que vós me nordestes, arranha-céu da boca paulista. Cadeiras elétricas da baiana, sentença que o turista cheire, e os sem amor, os sem teto, os sem paixão, sem alqueire, no peito dos sem peito uma seta, e a cigana analfabeta, lendo a mão de Paulo Freire. A contenteza do triste, tristezura do contente, vozes de faca cortando, vozes de faca cortando, como o riso da serpente, são sons de sims, não contudo, pé quebrado, verso mudo, grito no hospital da gente, são sons de sims, não, no, nine, não, no, nine, não, no, nine, são sons, hey, Na Catolé do Rocha, praça de guerra. Catolé do Rocha, onde o homem pode terra. Catolé do Rocha, praça de guerra. Catolé do Rocha, onde o homem pode terra. Bari, tem uma bala no meu corpo. Bari, e não é bala de coco. Bari, tem uma bala no meu corpo. Bari, e não é bala de coco. São sons de sims, são sons de sims. Não, contudo, pé quebrado, verso mudo, grito no hospital da gente. E viva o mestre Paulo Freire. Eu estou muito feliz, muito emocionado de participar
Después de esta agradable melodía desde Brasil, pues recibimos muchísimos saludos de muchas partes del mundo, de Argentina.
After this music, we are receiving several from many countries, several congratulations that are arriving. Many campaigns, many organizations are present here and congratulate all this event, this moment. They are happy for what is being said here for Paulo Freire and for the critical vision of many of the people that has taken the floor, and also the concrete efforts that, for instance, from Asia are coming. And there are many questions, specific questions, and we will see how to face these questions. One very direct question is, where do you find concrete reference of your work, Katarina? And they ask where to find the new way of thinking of Colombia. And even if there are a lot of questions, I invite you to share the reflections. As for instance, how, aside from changing the world, they ask in the chat, how do we do it? And reference in other regions, as Paulo Freire is so important, which are the other people in other regions. So we are giving 2 minutes to Vernor to comment your reflections in this part of the dialogue. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you. To everybody in Mexico, thank you. My second homeland. And there is not a question for me exactly, but I want to speak about the stance in education. The access to education doesn't change anything. To have people educated, of course, is important, but an education that is not well oriented can produce the contrary. It can produce the stereotype, the prejudice. So it will not bring us to a transformation. We are not happy with any kind of education. We need an education based on human rights and that will respond to the different needs of the communities and the discriminated groups. So that's the type of education that we are looking, and it needs to be based not on the other ideas, not on the vertical ideas, not on the discriminated ideas, not on. So we need to, in the pedagogical sense, we need to focus Freire as a political content. It cannot be neutral, as our friend from Africa was saying. It must be directed to break those asymmetries, and that is only possible to have in consideration the international law of human rights. That's why it's so important not to forget the perspective of rights. Thank you. Thank you, Vernor, for your contribution. Let's see the homage of from the different generations. Sunil, there is a reference thanking the method with young people. Some comments for your, some minutes for your comments, please.
Sunil, ¿estás por ahí o podemos regresar? Ya estamos. Adelante.
Hello.
Adelante.
Yeah. May I pardon? Can you repeat the question, please?
Claro. Vamos a...
Yes. We will comment in general, and there is a reference to the work that you have done according to Freire's method from the youth.
Yes, ASPBAE believes that young people needs to be capacitated, enable their capacity to conduct research, and using research to build their critical thinking about social economic realities. And this is very important, and especially when the region has many young people living in the many countries. So that is where we need to understand their realities, their concerns, and engage them into the political processes of bringing the change. That's one. And second, when we are saying when we are working in the community with the people, and that is where we are building their solidarity. So building their critical consciousness and also building their solidarity, which is based on evidence-based advocacy. These are very important key principles. And this is where the young people will start shifting their perspectives to look at their reality and also become active agents. And as we see, our initiative, which is Youth-Led Action Research Initiative, is aimed towards building new knowledge, which is coming from bottom-up processes. It is also building critical thinkers in the community, which is coming from critical consciousness process, and also making change agents, building change agents, leaders in the community, which will be able to use that knowledge for the community benefit. And we believe we all have to keep on integrating Freire's principles in different ways. Of course, we have to engage into discourse and build on the knowledge, which the legacy and the knowledge of Freire's, but we have to also continue using his principles into actions and programs, because that praxis of intergeneration across the sector, whether it's a knowledge, academic institutions, practitioners, facilitators, that needs to be continuous. And that's how we will feed each other. Thank you.
Oh, muchísimas gracias por tus aportes. Katarina.
Thank you for your support, Catherine. There was a precise reference to regarding the thought of the popular universities and your final comments. Please, Catherine.
Thank you. Well, to answer the question how to change the world through education, we would need a few days, but I will try to put it briefly. I agree with Pedro, so we change a person and indirectly we change the world. But that's the point. We change the person, we change the groups, the community, we change them through empowering them. We change the culture. And I think we need to change it towards the culture of human rights, treating education as one of the human rights. So it's possible, and honestly speaking, I don't see other way or better way to change the world instead of changing through the personal development, community development, society development. But of course, which values and which principles, that's what we have to focus on. What kind of education do we support? not buying or accepting uncritically dominant paradigms and dominant discourses coming from the decision makers, you know, this pragmatic approach to education, which is useful but very limited, but going for a transformative education. And for doing that, we need to learn from each other and we need to join forces. The task is too big, no one can do it alone. We need to join forces, people from different spaces, people from different regions. And finally, we need to send a message, to promote the message stronger than ever. If you think education is expensive and you don't want to invest in it, try ignorance. Well, the world is trying with ignorance and underestimating education for some time already, and we see the consequences. Business as usual will not do. So we need to go for transformative education more than ever. Thank you.
Excelentes aportaciones, Katarina, y bueno, muchos
Excellent, your reflections, Katarina. Very important. Dr. Saim is not connected with internet. In Beirut, Lebanon, is working there, the doctor. So we will give the floor to Adama. We have some questions in relation with some references for Africa, and especially the question on what to change in the world aside from the education. Adama, please, your last comments.
Peut-être je vais dire changer, mais changer est lent. C'est un processus malheureusement. Et changer pour aller...
I would say the change, but the change is too long. We need to take the changes immediately in society so deep that they, through education, we can produce some of these changes. This is an idea. And for those that have just discovered Freire, I would say that we will reinterpret him and we will recover his thought to give something into these dynamics. I prefer that. I prefer to rediscover him. Thank you so much. Thank you for this legacy of Paulo Freire thought. And now we have a question regarding the letters to Guinea-Bissau, a question that, Pedro, we ask you to answer. Which are the global actions that should be taken in education? Pedro, please, for you the floor. I think that the global actions, in first place, call for a world movement of world citizenship. We are living processes that need articulation and resistance at a global plane. So we need a movement of world citizenship. Another fight at a global level is to assure the rights, the human rights, especially the right for education throughout life. In all the moments of life, we need to see education as a lot of learnings that are processes and that demand educational spaces and policies that assure that possibility to anyone in the world. And finally, I think that in this moment that we are living of profound inequality, social inequality, in this context of pandemic, the education for solidarity, the exercise of solidarity is a practice very proper of Paulo Freire that asks us actions in all the fields. I think that these great interventions are set Paulo Freire's legacy all around the world, throughout the coalitions of different places of the world that defend the right for education and have realized this important event that leave an important point in order to continue reflecting on this legacy that activates us. In order to continue and finish the program, we will give the floor to another companion, but we also will see a video for the closing. So I think we put first the closing video and then we see the final words of this friend.
O menino lê o mundo, olha o céu e risca o chão, traça a linha do horizonte, silencia, vai à fonte, dança solto na amplidão. Brinca, canta, segue, vive, vai crescendo, homem livre, sob o sol de Jaboatão. No Recife se fez mestre, em Angicos ele acende um farol que vai bem fundo, uma luz feita pro mundo de uma nova educação. Canta a bela melodia, traz a velha fantasia, rompe com qualquer prisão. Sua voz se faz canção, seu olhar abre horizontes, guarda a força da semente, vive o mestre em quem aprende, esperançar por esse chão. Vamos reaprender o Brasil, esperançar por esse chão. Vamos reencantar a nação, esperançar por esse chão. Vamos cantar a vida de novo. Paulo Freire morre não. Vamos reaprender o Brasil, esperançar por esse chão. Vamos reencantar a nação, esperançar por esse chão. Vamos cantar a vida de novo. Paulo Freire morre não. Vamos reaprender o Brasil, esperançar por esse chão. Vamos reencantar a nação, esperançar por esse chão. Vamos cantar a vida de novo. Paulo Freire morre não. O menino lê o mundo, olha o céu e risca o chão, risca o chão. Traça a linha do horizonte, silencia, vai à fonte, dança solto na amplidão. Brinca, canta, segue, vive, vai crescendo, homem livre, sob o sol de Jaboatão. No Recife se fez mestre, em Angicos ele acende um farol que vai bem fundo, uma luz feita pro mundo de uma nova educação. Canta a bela melodia, traz a velha fantasia, rompe com qualquer prisão. Sua voz se faz canção, seu olhar abre horizontes, guarda a força da semente, vive o mestre em quem aprende, esperançar por esse chão. Vamos reaprender o Brasil, esperançar por esse chão. Vamos reencantar a nação, esperançar por esse chão. Vamos cantar a vida de novo. Paulo Freire morre não. Vamos reaprender o Brasil, esperançar por esse chão. Vamos reencantar a nação, esses vamos encantar a nação. Vamos cantar a vida de novo. Paulo Freire morre não. Paulo Freire morre não. Paulo Freire morre não.
Qué agradable video que le pone vida y sabor.
What a wonderful video that puts life and flavor to what we are doing. OMEP Venezuela, Dr. Iliana Lopriore will send us a message. Good morning. In these several regards, I want to invite you to systematize some force ideas of our campaign. It has been important from the different continents and from the revision of critical analysis of all these organizations and all these speakers, so important speakers that have participated in this event. Regarding Paulo Freire, it is very important because you have looked at him from a policy, democracy, educational, and citizenship regard, and this is very important to conceive this new education according to the force ideas of today. We can say that this thought of Freire is still present. It is political, a political thought regarding education that makes possible to have citizenship, critical citizenship that could be active and could be present, the need of developing a policy as the permanency of education in order to transform education together with the society. Education is a political commitment and we need courage to assume it. The thought, the freedom's thought, the liberating thought of Freire needs to be renewed and recontextualized and recreated in order to surpass the normal ways of thinking. This thought is not fixed. We need to liberate it with its transforming energy. The neoliberal dominance has been so strong that needs another kind of thought to be surpassed. And it is very important to surpass this pragmatism. Another idea is that we need to reshape the world and change it according to new ideas. We need to resist and have hope to push new paradigms for civilization. It is needed to overpass the empty rhetorics and incorporate public policies that are according to this perspective, underlying the importance of the formative practice associated with this capacity of surpassing problems in the individuals, with the idea that the educative practice is the way to transform the world. We need to favor plurality of options in order to value also the intergenerational and women's practices of all the social movements. It is important to transcend the school educational teachings in order to have an emancipatory and liberating teachings for the world. It's not any kind of change, it is a freedom change. We are in a difficult moment, but a moment with a lot of possibilities. So we need to see the changes that we need. We need to love our freedoms and democracies and to fight for the human dignity. And finally, the Freire invitation for many continents has been a lot of inspiration for many ambits further than just school and university. It is social, it is social fightings, and in the ethics, the aesthetic, the fight, and politics, to fight for the concretion of this common dream that we have, of this utopia that is a task for transformation of everyone, for this world that could be better for everyone. We need to assume the risk and assume as a phrase of Freire, I never had fear to challenge freedom and solidarity. So in this reinvention of the world, the proposal of Freire is clue in order to make a pedagogical, aesthetic, and ethic proposal that will insist one and again to change the world and transform the being of the world, to form the citizens that live in this earth with looking for a future with justice and democracy. In synthesis, we share these big ideas that have been generated in the day of today in the name of CLADE.
Muchas gracias, Ileana.
Thank you, Ileana, Jesus, and everybody. We say bye-bye to everyone. We are very happy. Thank you. Thank you, all of you. Thank you. A big hug for each one of you. Thank you.
Hasta luego. Un abrazo.
Bye-bye. A big hug. Bye. Bye-bye.
Gracias.
Bye. Thank you.